Los Angeles just became ground zero for the most aggressive socialist electoral strategy in any major American city. While you were watching federal immigration raids play out in the streets, Democratic Socialists of America endorsed candidates are positioning to flip 8 city council seats and potentially unseat Mayor Karen Bass in 2026. The numbers are staggering. 3 DSA-backed council members already in office, mansion tax revenue hitting $900 million annually, and a voter registration surge in progressive districts that has establishment Democrats scrambling. This isn't Brooklyn. This is the second largest city in America, and the power structure is cracking wide open. Here's what Sacramento isn't telling you about the Los Angeles leftward shift. And look, before we dive into the mechanics of what's actually happening here, I need you to do something for me. If you're exhausted from watching political coverage that gives you surface-level horse race analysis without showing you the actual legislative files, the budget amendments, the district-level data that reveals how power actually transfers in this state, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel exists because you're tired of being told what to think instead of being shown how to read the game yourself. We're not here to tell you whether socialism is good or bad. We're here to show you exactly how this takeover attempt is structured, who's funding it, and what the math looks like for it to actually succeed. So subscribe if you want California political intelligence that treats you like an adult who can handle complexity. All right, let's get into this. Los Angeles is not just electing local officials in 2026, it's deciding whether the Democratic Socialists of America model can scale from borough councils in New York to governing the second largest city in the nation. And I need you to understand why this matters beyond just LA city limits. First, economic precedent. If DSA candidates flip the mayor's office or gain council supermajority, Los Angeles becomes the testing ground for wealth redistribution policies that will immediately be replicated in San Diego, San Jose, and Oakland. The mansion tax model alone has already been copied by 3 California cities. A full socialist governance structure would accelerate that trend statewide. You'll see these policies in your city within 18 months if they work in LA. Second, federal immigration conflict. Mayor Bass's fumbled response to ICE raids has created a mobilization opportunity for leftist candidates promising true sanctuary city status with 0 cooperation clauses. This sets up a direct confrontation with federal enforcement that will define California's posture for the next presidential term. We're talking about city governments openly defying federal immigration law, and Los Angeles would be the first major metro to do it systematically. Third, police reform endgame. Every other progressive city has stopped short of actual abolition language. Los Angeles DSA is explicitly campaigning on ending the LAPD as currently structured. If that happens, the national conversation shifts from reform to abolish and replace, with fiscal and public safety implications that ripple through every major American metro. This is the endgame scenario for the defund movement, and LA is where it either succeeds or collapses completely. Now here's the unique angle we're bringing you that you will not get from other outlets. We're not covering the protest footage. We're not interviewing activists about their feelings. We're analyzing the actual policy files, budget amendments, and district-level voter registration data that shows exactly how this takeover attempt is structured mechanically. Other channels are covering the theater. We're covering the legislative engineering. And I need to bust a myth right now because I keep seeing this everywhere. Los Angeles is safely Democratic, so these races don't matter. That is completely false. And it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how municipal elections work. Democratic voters in LA are fragmenting into 3 distinct factions: establishment moderates who want competent governance, progressive reformers who want incremental change, and democratic socialists who want structural transformation. That 3-way split creates plurality win opportunities for candidates with just 28 to 32% of the vote. The math favors insurgents in low turnout municipal elections. So when you hear people say LA is safely blue, what they're missing is that blue doesn't mean anything when the Democratic electorate itself is in civil war. Let me show you how we got here, because this didn't happen overnight. Democratic Socialists of America Los Angeles has transformed from a protest movement into a campaign infrastructure machine in under 5 years, and the speed of that transformation is what makes this so dangerous for the establishment. In 2020, 3 DSA-endorsed candidates won city council seats: Nithya Raman in District 5, Ulises Hernandez in District 1, and Hugo Soto Martinez in District 13. All 3 were first-time candidates. All 3 defeated incumbents. That alone should have been a 5-alarm fire for establishment Democrats, but they dismissed it as a fluke driven by George Floyd, protests, and pandemic anger. They were wrong. DSA-LA reported 4,200 active members as of January 2025, up from 1,400 in 2020. That's a 300% growth rate in membership during a period when most political organizations were shrinking. And these aren't just people who signed up online and forgot about it. These are activated members doing canvassing, phone banking, and voter registration drives every single week. The endorsement impact is measurable. DSA voter guides reached an estimated 230,000 voters in the 2024 cycle through canvassing and digital distribution. In municipal elections where total turnout is maybe 600,000 voters, reaching 230,000 with your messaging is an insane advantage. You're hitting 1 in 3 voters with a curated guide telling them exactly who to vote for on every race down to school board. And here's the organizational capacity that nobody's talking about. DSA-LA operates 15 neighborhood committees with dedicated field organizers in target council districts. These aren't volunteers showing up when they feel like it. These are paid organizers running permanent field offices in Boyle Heights, Highland Park, Koreatown, Silver Lake, and East Hollywood. They have institutional infrastructure that persists between election cycles, which means they're always in campaign mode. Now let me speculate on what this actually means, because this is where it gets interesting. This isn't grassroots enthusiasm. This is institutionalized electoral machinery operating at a level that rivals what the Democratic Party itself has in Los Angeles. And here's the kicker: the same organizers who ran Raman's campaign in 2020 are now embedded in city government as council staff. Nithya Raman hired her campaign manager as her chief of staff. Ulises Hernandez brought in organizers from tenant unions to run her district office. Hugo Soto Martinez staffed up with people from the Green New Deal Coalition. So you have a revolving door between activist organizations and policymaking positions, which creates a feedback loop where DSA isn't just electing candidates, they're capturing the actual machinery of city government. That infrastructure advantage means DSA candidates enter 2026 races with pre-existing field operations while establishment Democrats are still hiring consultants and figuring out their messaging. It's like showing up to a gunfight where the other side has been training at the range for 5 years and you're still loading your weapon. But infrastructure means nothing without a policy agenda that mobilizes voters. And that's where the mansion tax reveals the actual strategy. The Measure ULA mansion tax isn't just a revenue source, it's proof of concept for wealth redistribution that funds the very campaigns pushing for more aggressive taxation. Let me break down the numbers, because this is where you see the genius of the political engineering. Measure ULA has generated $900 million in its first 2 years from sales of properties over $5 million. That's almost $1 billion in revenue from taxing real estate transactions in the luxury market. Now here's the spending breakdown. And this is where it gets wild. 32% went to homeless housing construction, 41% went to rental assistance vouchers, and 27% went to administrative costs and community organizing grants. Pause on that last category. Administrative costs and community organizing grants. What does that actually mean? It means that organizations receiving ULA grants include tenant unions, housing advocacy groups, and community land trusts that provide volunteer labor for DSA campaigns. The mansion tax is literally funding the infrastructure that elects more socialist candidates who then expand the mansion tax. It's a self-sustaining political ecosystem, and they're not stopping at $5 million. DSA-backed council members have proposed expanding ULA to properties over $2 million, which would triple revenue to an estimated $2.7 billion annually. Think about what that means. If that expansion passes, you're looking at nearly $3 billion a year flowing through organizations that are directly aligned with DSA's political project. That's more money than most statewide political parties operate with. You've effectively created a billion-dollar annual budget for left organizing in Los Angeles, all flowing from property owners in Brentwood, Pacific Palisades, and Beverly Hills who are funding their own political opposition. Follow the money trail, and this is what you see. ULA creates tax revenue. Revenue funds community organizations. Those organizations mobilize voters for socialist candidates. Those candidates expand the tax and the cycle accelerates. This is textbook political infrastructure building disguised as housing policy. It's so elegant that I almost have to admire it from a strategic standpoint, even if you disagree with the politics. Now, that fiscal strategy works as long as public safety remains stable. But the police reform agenda is where this movement shows its actual ambitions, and this is where a lot of moderate voters are going to have serious concerns. DSA candidates aren't campaigning on police reform, they're running on systematic reduction of LAPD capacity and reallocation of $3 billion in public safety funding. Let me give you the specific policies so you understand this isn't abstract theory. Council File 24-0857 is a resolution introduced by DSA-backed council member Ulises Hernandez that would ban the Los Angeles Police Department from conducting traffic stops for minor violations. Now, on the surface, that sounds reasonable. Nobody likes getting pulled over for a broken taillight. But read the fiscal analysis. This ban eliminates $60 million in fine revenue annually and reduces police-civilian contact by an estimated 43%. You're cutting nearly half of all interactions between LAPD and the public, which sounds great if you think those interactions are inherently oppressive, but creates massive gaps in public safety enforcement if you think traffic stops also catch people with warrants, stolen vehicles, and DUI drivers. Then you have the budget proposals. DSA council members are pushing to redirect $800 million from the LAPD overtime budget to a community safety ambassadors program run by nonprofit contractors. Who runs those nonprofits? The same tenant unions and mutual aid networks that are part of the DSA coalition. So you're taking money from police officers and giving it to activists to do unarmed street patrols. Again, you can agree or disagree with that policy, but understand what's happening. Police capacity goes down, contractor funding goes up, and the contractors are politically aligned with the candidates making the decision. There's also a hiring freeze. DSA council members voted as a bloc to prevent LAPD from filling 350 vacant positions, which reduces the force size by 4%. And when you read the campaign literature from DSA-endorsed candidates, the long-term vision is explicit. They want non-police emergency response to replace officers in mental health calls, homeless outreach, and traffic incidents. Those three categories represent approximately 70% of current LAPD calls for service. So you're talking about reducing police response to 70% of what they currently do and replacing it with social workers and community ambassadors. Now let me speculate on what this actually means in practice. This isn't incremental reform. This is a 10-year plan to dismantle the LAPD as currently structured and replace it with a contractor-based system that employs the same activists running the campaigns. The political genius is that every reduction in police capacity creates justification for more community-based alternatives, which then hire from the DSA talent pool. And when crime goes up, which it will if you reduce police presence by 40 to 70%, DSA will argue that's proof the police were never effective in the first place and you need even more investment in alternative response systems. It's a hostile takeover of public safety infrastructure, and it's already 40% implemented based on the policies that have passed. Now overlay that police reduction strategy with Mayor Bass's vulnerabilities, and you see why 2026 could deliver an upset that reshapes California. Mayor Karen Bass enters the 2026 race with approval numbers in the mid-40s and a growing list of progressive grievances that create left flank vulnerability. Her approval rating sits at 46% approve, 41% disapprove as of January 2025 polling. That's down from 58% at inauguration. She's underwater in progressive districts and barely holding moderates. The ICE raid response perfectly encapsulates her political trap. Bass condemned the raids publicly, but did not invoke sanctuary city protections or direct LAPD to refuse cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. So immigrant rights groups and DSA organizers are attacking her for being complicit with deportations, while moderate voters think she's not doing enough to support federal law enforcement. She's getting hit from both sides and satisfying nobody. Then there's the homelessness crisis, which was supposed to be her signature issue. The unsheltered population increased by 11% in the first 2 years of the Bass administration, despite the Inside Safe program, which was supposed to move people from tents into hotel rooms and transitional housing. The data shows it's not working at scale, and that gives DSA candidates an opening to argue that incremental shelter programs are pointless and you need systemic wealth redistribution to actually solve homelessness. Bass also has corporate ties that create a tax surface for anti-establishment challengers. She received significant campaign funding from real estate developers and entertainment industry executives in 2022. That's normal for LA mayors, but it's political poison when you're trying to defend yourself against candidates arguing you're captured by capital and real estate interests. And Bass did not receive DSA endorsement in 2022 and is extremely unlikely to pursue it in 2026, which means she's conceding the activist left before the race even starts. So here's the speculation. Bass is trapped in the center-left no man's land. She can't move right without losing her progressive base completely, and she can't move left without validating DSA's critique that she's been corporate captured and ineffective. If a DSA candidate like housing activist Ray Chen Huang enters the race and consolidates the left at 28 to 30%, and a moderate challenger takes another 22 to 25%, Bass could finish third in the primary. The math is absolutely brutal in a fragmented field, and LA's election system doesn't have runoffs anymore. It's top two advancing to the general. So if Bass finishes third with 34%, she's done. And that scenario is not hypothetical. That is a realistic outcome based on current polling and voter distribution. Bass's weakness creates opportunity, but DSA still needs a candidate who can translate activist energy into citywide appeal. That's where the council races become critical because they're building the bench. 8 of 15 Los Angeles City Council seats are on the ballot in 2026, and DSA needs to flip just 3 to control the legislative agenda. Let me show you the power math here because it's simpler than people think. Currently, DSA holds 3 seats, districts 1, 5, and 13. That's 3 of 15 total. They're targeting districts 7, 9, and 11, which all show voter registration shifts toward progressive candidates over the last 2 cycles. DSA field operations are already active in those districts, running voter registration drives and early endorsement campaigns. If they flip those 3 seats, they go from 3 to 6. That's still a minority on a 15-member council, but here's why it matters. You need 10 of 15 votes to override a mayoral veto. So if DSA gets to 6 or 7 seats and can pull 3 or 4 votes from progressive-leaning moderates, they hit that 10-vote supermajority threshold. At that point, the mayor becomes irrelevant. Every budget item, every police policy, every zoning decision goes through a council that can override mayoral vetoes at will. Now look at the funding dynamics. DSA-backed candidates raised an average of $400,000 per race in 2020 through small dollar donations. Establishment Democrats averaged $1.2 million through traditional PACs and developer contributions. So you'd think the establishment has a 3-to-1 spending advantage. But in municipal elections, Money doesn't convert to votes the same way it does in statewide races. You're not buying television ads that reach millions of people. You're running hyper-local campaigns where door knocking and voter contact matter more than media buys. And here's the turnout dynamic that changes everything. Municipal elections typically draw 28 to 32% turnout. Presidential cycles hit 60 to 65%. So you're dealing with a completely different electorate. The people who show up for city council races are hyper-engaged, ideologically motivated voters who actually read voter guides and care about local policy. That's DSA's demographic. The casual voter who shows up because it's a presidential year and votes straight Democratic down the ballot, they're not showing up for a municipal election in an off-cycle year. So DSA's mobilization advantage increases dramatically in low turnout environments. Here's my speculation on the council races. Even if Bass wins re-election, a DSA supermajority makes her irrelevant. She becomes a figurehead who can give speeches but can't actually stop any legislation the council wants to pass. And the funding disparity doesn't matter as much as volunteer infrastructure in these races. DSA can knock on 50,000 doors in a target district while establishment campaigns are buying mailers that people throw away and television ads that nobody under 40 watches. If they flip 3 seats, Los Angeles governance shifts left. If they flip 5, it's a complete progressive takeover, and the city becomes a laboratory for policies that will define the next decade of urban governance in America. The odds of that happening are significantly better than most political observers realize, but this surge isn't happening in a vacuum. There's backlash building, and it could either accelerate DSA momentum or create a counter-mobilization that flips the script entirely. DSA's rise has triggered 3 distinct opposition forces: police unions, real estate developers, and moderate Democrats, all mobilizing for 2026. And their resources are substantial. The Los Angeles Police Protective League has committed $4.5 million to independent expenditure campaigns opposing DSA candidates. That's serious money that will fund attack ads, opposition research, and coordinated messaging about public safety failures in districts represented by Socialist council members. Police unions are extremely effective at voter mobilization when they're threatened, and they have built-in communication channels through community policing programs and neighborhood watch networks. Real estate developers spent $2.1 million in 2024 fighting ULA expansion measures, and they're preparing to spend significantly more in 2026 if DSA candidates are proposing to lower the mansion tax threshold to $2 million. Developer money funds moderate Democratic candidates who support housing construction but oppose wealth redistribution schemes that make development economically unviable. Establishment Democrats are recruiting business-backed candidates in all 8 target districts with coordinated messaging on pragmatic progressivism, essentially trying to outflank DSA on the left while maintaining credibility with business interests. They're positioning themselves as the reasonable progressives who want reform without revolution. Then there's a Republican opportunity that's probably overstated but worth mentioning. GOP registration is up 6% in Valley districts, where crime concerns dominate local polling. Republicans can't win citywide in Los Angeles. But they can play spoiler in council races by pulling 20 to 25% and forcing runoffs that benefit moderate Democrats. And there are internal DSA conflicts that could blow the whole thing up. Reports are emerging of factional splits between electoral socialists focused on winning office and making incremental gains, and abolitionist socialists demanding immediate defund policies and refusing to compromise with moderates. If those factions can't maintain coalition discipline, the whole movement fractures. So here's my speculation on the backlash. The counter-mobilization is real, but it's fragmented. Police unions and developers can spend money, but they can't knock on doors with the same grassroots credibility as tenant organizers who live in the districts they're canvassing. Moderate Democrats have the establishment infrastructure, but they're trying to defend a status quo that voters already rejected when they elected the current DSA council members in 2020 and 2022. The Republican angle is overblown. Los Angeles is 71% Democratic registration, and GOP voters are concentrated in districts that aren't competitive anyway. The actual threat to DSA comes from internal divisions. If the movement splits between pragmatists willing to compromise on police budgets to build governing coalitions and absolutists demanding immediate abolition and refusing any negotiation with moderates, the coalition collapses under its own ideological purity tests. Watch for primary endorsement fights within DSA chapters over the next 60 days. If you see competing DSA factions endorsing different candidates in the same race, that's the signal that internal discipline is breaking down. That's the vulnerability. So where does this leave Los Angeles politics in the next 300 days? Let me give you the bottom line and the scenarios you should be tracking. Los Angeles. 2026 is not a standard municipal election. It's a stress test of whether democratic socialists can govern at metropolitan scale. The infrastructure is built, the funding model through mansion tax revenue is operational. The policy agenda on police reduction and wealth redistribution is written and ready to implement. What's unknown is whether voter appetite for structural change outweighs concerns about public safety deterioration and fiscal sustainability. Here's what matters for every California resident watching this, even if you don't live in Los Angeles. If DSA wins Los Angeles, the model scales statewide within 2 years. The mansion tax structure gets copied by every major California city. The police reduction blueprint gets implemented in Oakland, Sacramento, and San Diego. The sanctuary city confrontation with federal immigration enforcement becomes statewide California policy, setting up a constitutional crisis between state and federal authority. You will see these policies in your city whether you voted for them or not, because Los Angeles sets the policy template that other jurisdictions follow. And if DSA loses, the progressive movement fragments. Moderate Democrats reclaim urban governance, and California politics shifts back toward the incrementalism that has defined the last 2 decades. The energy deflates, the organizers get disillusioned, and the window for transformative change closes for another generation. Now let me give you the speculative outlook and the timeline for what to watch in the next 30 days, because this is where you can track whether this is actually going to happen or if it's going to fizzle. February 15th is the candidate filing deadline for city council races. Watch for DSA endorsement announcements and whether any sitting council members face primary challenges from the left. If DSA is endorsing in all 8 target districts and recruiting credible candidates with organizing backgrounds, that signals they're going all in on the council strategy. If they're only endorsing in 3 or 4 races, they're being selective and probably don't have the resources for a full takeover attempt. February 23rd is when Mayor Bass delivers her budget proposal to the City Council. The police department allocation in that budget will signal whether she's moving to neutralize DSA criticism by proposing cuts and alternative response funding, or whether she's defending the status quo and daring them to vote against public safety. If Bass proposes maintaining LAPD funding above $3 billion with no significant investment in community alternatives, she's drawing a line and betting that moderate voters will back her against DSA. If she proposes moving $400 or $500 million from police to alternative programs, she's trying to split the difference and diffuse the issue. March 3rd is the big one. DSA-LA holds their endorsement convention. If they endorse a mayoral challenger to Bass at that convention, that's the official declaration of full insurgency. That means they believe they have the infrastructure and the momentum to actually win the mayor's office, not just pick up council seats. If they decline to endorse in the mayoral race and focus exclusively on council races, that signals they're being strategic and building power incrementally, rather than going for a knockout punch they're not ready to deliver. Here's what to watch as your 30-day inflection point. If Bass's budget maintains LAPD funding above $3 billion and DSA endorses a challenger, we're looking at a contested primary that fractures the Democratic coalition and creates plurality win conditions for a socialist candidate with just 28 to 30%. That's your scenario for a genuine upset that reshapes not just Los Angeles, but California politics for the next decade. You now know more about Los Angeles power dynamics than 90% of political reporters covering this race. You understand the infrastructure, the funding mechanisms, the policy agenda, and the electoral math. You know where the vulnerabilities are and what the timeline looks like. If you want this level of California political intelligence before the mainstream outlets catch up, subscribe to this channel right now. We're not doing surface-level protest footage and activist interviews. We're reading the council files, analyzing the voter registration data, tracking the budget amendments, and following the money flows that show you how power actually moves in this state. No fluff, no partisan cheerleading, no telling you what to think. Just the capital truth on California politics delivered with the assumption that you're smart enough to make your own judgments when you have actual information. Next video drops in 72 hours, Sacramento's insurance crisis and the Make It Fair Act battle that could reshape homeowner policies statewide and determine whether middle-class Californians can afford to stay in this state. Subscribe so you don't miss it.